God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
Bere'sheet chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. V'ahi ki hakel ha'adam, l'rov al pnei ha'adama, yuvanot yuledu lahem. Ve'ya'u b'nei ha'elohim, et benot ha'adam, ki tovot hana, ve'yaku lahem nashim meko asher bakaru. Ve'gomer Adonai, lo yadan ruki, v'yadam lo olam, v'shagram hu basa, v'hayu yomav me'ah, v'sarim shana. Nephilim, hayu v'aretz, v'yayim hahem, v'gam akre chen asher yavo'u b'nei ha'elohim, il benot ha'adam, V'yaladu lahem hema ha'gibborim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. Shalom, this is ben-Emmett with another exciting Torah Watchman edition. This time is called The Dawn of the Nephilim, the most controversial set of verses in the entire Jewish Bible, and is still in heavy debate today on its implied meaning. Very ancient text. As you know, the book of Genesis was the first book chronologically, and the 5 books of the Torah, the 5 books of Moshe. And by tradition, Moshe wrote the Sidra down, wrote these passages down when he received it on Mount Sinai, when he was there for 40 days, 40 nights, and the synagogue of synagogues and Shamayim. Chapter 6, verse 1 is interesting, and I'll read it in English now. Man began to increase on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. These men that I'm speaking about is referring to the direct descendants of Canaan. And verse 2, the sons of God, and in English here, the word God is capitalized, and that's debatable, saw that the daughters of men were good, and they took themselves wives from whoever they chose. Chapter 6, verse 3, it says, God said, my spirit will not continue to judge man forever, since he is nothing but flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Titans were on the earth in those days and also later. The sons of God had come to the daughters of men and had fathered them. And it has in brackets, the Titans were the mightiest ones who ever existed, men of renown. And as you know, the rest of the verses here, this is the prelude to the great and terrible flood that ended all humanity save Noah and his family. Moving forward now in this discussion, and this is something I actually had a very personal interest in as long as I can remember, okay? I had a question posed to me. it simply says, I want to know what is the position of mainstream Judaism on the identity of the Nephilim. I personally believe they were humans, but some people tend to see them as hybrids or heroes. Thank you. Okay? So I read some books. I did some research. Of course, I have a personal opinion, but Hashem's opinion outrules anything I could say, outrules anything a sage can say, outrules anything a rabbi could say, or a denomination within Judaism, okay, of orthodoxy. And I'm speaking strictly orthodoxy. Mainstream Judaism is considered to be orthodoxy, okay? Nothing reform, no liberal deviance. So, there are a lot of interpretations of this. Rashi was 11th century sage in the early Middle Ages. He was a cohort of Ramban a little bit later on. And of course, Ramban had a different opinion than Rashi. But anyway, Rashi's basic opinion on the Nephilim, that they were falling angels, okay? Fallen angels that desired the daughters of men, and somehow, impregnated them to create a race of giants or titans that dominated the planet. You can imagine if you were 8 or 9 feet in stature, if you were strong and powerful, you could probably overwhelm any other lesser race, right? You could dominate cities, you could dominate kingdoms, you could take women by choice, you could pillage, you can destroy, you can win every war and every conflict. It would not be fair to the more vulnerable people, namely the women, children, and orphans, and other things like that. This was abomination before God. And God allowed a critical nexus to occur, a center point to decide what my judgment, my grace is run empty, and my judgment will be a complete worldwide flood that will destroy all of mankind, all the animals, all the support systems for mankind, which included, unfortunately, a lot of polytheistic sacrifices to heathen gods, okay? I'd like to go, if something is highly debatable, if something is not really confirmed, and there's no real group consensus, what you hope to have is a quorum, Armenian opinion on a rabbinical circle, at least 3 rabbis or people of some authority to say, well, the most minimalistic interpretation is probably the more closer to the truth. In other words, the Nephilim were great men that had ascended to the glories of heaven as far as, righteousness or whatever, and fell to the debasement, the utter debasement of humanity. So they were given gifts, they were given talents, great prestige, great wisdom. These people back then lived hundreds and hundreds of years. Adam, of blessed memory, lived 30 years or something. So they lived hundreds and hundreds of years. And when you live hundreds and hundreds of years, you can achieve all kinds of wealth. Okay, everyone has seen Highlander, the movie, and all this. Well, you can understand if you lived hundreds and hundreds of years, you would accumulate a lot of wealth, a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, a lot of potential to have wisdom, but having knowledge does not mean you're wise, right? Okay, so it is what it is. But moving forward here, I want to now give you a more precise definition on the word Nephilim. Now, in the beginning, I read for you these portions, namely Genesis or Bere'sheet, chapter 6, roughly verses 1 through 3 or 1 through 4 for context. It's the beginning of chapter 6. As it's defined by my Jewish learning, and I go there all the time, and I'm going to read a little bit here. It is defined as a race of giants said to have dwelt in pre-Israelite Canaan. They're also referenced at Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 13:33. Remember the 12 spies that went into Canaan, and they were afraid and came back with a negative report because they saw huge walled cities built by huge hands, giants of men, that kind of thing. Very scary, okay? Now, Jaitism, if I'm saying the word correct, is an anomaly in Homo sapiens today, in people, in mankind. It's considered a genetic mutation, and it really doesn't end well. People that are born as giants actually have a lot of spinal problems, a lot of knee problems, other problems, and they don't live a long time, okay? They are very tall, very large, very muscular people today, but they are considered a genetic anomaly, okay? They're all created in the image of God, but there's big people, there's small people, there's skinny people, there's fat people, whatever. To each their own. People are all created in the image of God, and they're all equally beautiful in God's eyes and my eyes. But, in Genesis chapter 6, 1 through 2, it relates that the sons of gods, and here in this translation in English, the quotes are sons of gods and a small g for gods. In other words, like the gods of ancient Egypt, the gods of Babylon, the gods of the Sumerian nations, Syria, Greeks, and Roman Empire. These are demigods or lower echelon of gods, that kind of thing. Divine or angelic beings is another possible interpretation. Took mortal wives, and in verse 4, if you're following along, it continues, and it was then and later too that Nephilim appeared on earth when the divine beings co-inhabited with the daughters of men. In other words, they consummated, they had intercourse and had offspring and things of that nature. They were the heroes of old, the men of great renown. Now, just me reading this, what does it remind you of? If you had any interest at all in Greek mythology, okay, there's great fairy tales, great stories, and everything else. Hercules in Greek mythology was actually a demigod himself. He was a son of Zeus, okay, and he had great power. He had great power. He was the strongest man living on the planet. But he came from a god. He was considered a demigod because he was part god and part human, according to Greek mythology. There's also, the use of word of titans here, or giants of men. Titans were actually something used in Greek mythology, and they had their own creation myths, and they had, in the beginning, the world was dominated by these titans, and eventually they were supplanted by the god Zeus and so on. You can read this later on. I won't get into it, okay? But, with every legend, every myth, there is a grain of truth, and it comes from some origin theory of like a Q source of something that's factual, okay? Just have an open mind. So, there's a debate. There are differing opinions on what the word Nephilim is. But any word, you can easily take it out of context if you have an agenda or bias, a personal bias. You have to know how the word is used in context, not in just in one chapter and one sefer or one book in the Torah, but throughout the Torah and throughout the Tanakh or the Jewish Bible. You have to know how it's referred to. King David, as a shepherd boy, killed Goliath, a giant, okay? So you may want to ask yourself, if it was a great and giant flood and waters covered the face of the planet, all land masses were covered by oceans and continual rain and flooding, that all land-breathing animals and people perished. But Rashi has a story that some of these giants cling to Noah's Ark. Also, they went to some higher mountain peaks that escaped the floods. Okay, all of this is in the will of Hashem. Hashem has a reason for all these happening in the first place. A lot of other interpretations are found in the Babylonian Talmud. There's so-called a book of Enoch. It's actually written by Jews. It is considered apocryphal or just stories, legends. It's not considered to be divine at all. But if you have an opinion and you're really passionate about that opinion, you can be sincere about something. You can also be sincerely wrong. Okay. I heard from Rabbi Tovia Singer. He explained this, and I cannot really disagree with him. He does not believe that the Nephilim or fallen ones were fallen angels, or the titans or giants were from, incest and consummation between the daughters of man and angelic or non-corporeal beings, okay? The key word is non-corporeal versus corporeal, you know. He said, why would God judge the entire planet, kill every single life on the planet, including animals, all humans, all races of people, all nationalities, because of a subgroup of rebellious angels? It sounds more Christian, more dualistic, more Zoroastrianism than Jewish, okay? Again, if you're getting into all this debate and all this scandalous circles of logic and discussion and going back and forth, always go back to the final rule of arbitration, go back to the most clear interpretation, the least common denominator that you actually were human beings. Now, you may want to ask, well, with all this being said, what do you think, Yara ben-Emmett? This is where I can get in trouble. I can give you my opinion, but I have a logical reason why I'm about to say what I'm going to say, okay? Again, these giants were very powerful beings, okay? They dominated the earth at this time, before the time of Noah, before the time of the floods, okay? God gave them dominion. God allowed this to happen. As you know, the adversary was among the domain of men at that time, too. You can read the first of Job and learn about the characteristics of the adversary as a Moloch, as a messenger of God, but as a prosecuting attorney of God, and to see whether or not there's virtue within mankind and report that back with the help of other angels, messengers again, reporting that back to God before the heavenly court, and then having a judgment of whether or not if these people had sinned sufficiently. So with this premise here, if the adversary is not just one angel, not just one Moloch, but Molochim, a legion of angels, but under the direct command and control of Hashem. There's no conflict between God and his angels, folks. There's no warfare between angels and lesser angels. There's no good and bad angels, okay? The adversary does exactly what he's told to do and does not violate the intent of God, who has given him assigned tasks. For instance, he told in Job 1:1, God allowed the adversary to behold his righteous servant Job. The adversary came back, he's only righteous because you give him everything. And God said, well, prove me wrong. Go and, take away things from him, violate his flesh, but you cannot kill him, you cannot take his soul. So, adversary did exactly what God instructed him to do for that task. Now, what I'm discussing here is that the adversary does adversarial things. Deception, he colludes with mankind, it whispers in their ears, seduces them. But, there's something I want to point out, that we have a nefesh, we have a soul, so therefore we have a freedom of choice. We can say no to the adversary's seduction. We can say no to adulterous lust. We can say no to extortion or other criminal activity, and then become righteous, and our nefesh will be elevated at these key moments in our life. And then the adversary will have nothing to report back to God to judge. Actually, on Yom Kippur, that's exactly what happens. We all confess a huge multitude of sins. We fast for 24 hours. And at that day, by tradition, the adversary is off work. He's on vacation. He's not working because there's nothing to do. So continuing on here, the basic quandary is, do Malachim have a soul? Well, the answer, according to Torah, they do not have a soul. They are non-corporeal entities, okay? They are any number of myriads of angels within Shamayim. But remember, Yaakov's dream, Yaakov's ladder, when he was being pursued by Esau and other things like this. Remember Bethel, the offering that Yaakov, this means that God was here. But anyway, what Yaakov saw with the supernatural vision, he saw angels, or Malachim, not only descending from Shamayim, on this ladder, but also Malachim angels going back up to the ladder. So he saw a multi-dimensional, maybe wormhole, whatever, in space-time. I don't know. I get in all this science fiction. But anyway, he saw something that was probably happening all the time that we would not normally perceive, okay? I'm also thinking about Abraham, and again in the book of Bere'sheet in Genesis later on. Abraham was greeted by 3 angels. He thought they were strangers. He thought they were foreigners. But he had an open tent. He saw them. He perceived some righteousness, something of virtue of them. But they were human beings. They looked like you and me. I mean, they came to him and announced, the birth of Yitzhak. He also announced later on the imminent destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the 5 cities along what is today the Dead Sea. But anyway, these Malachim actually ate some veal, ate some meat, cheese, dairy, or whatever, ate some bread, drank some water, maybe some wine or something. How could an angel partake in this? How could they eat food and all this? Okay, Rashi said they were pretending to eat, pretending to drink, and all of this. Well, the most straightforward explanation was that these angels occupied human-like vessels, not the same as human beings, but human-like vessels or cloaks or whatever, that allowed them to temporarily sit down and have dialogue with God's servant Abraham and Sarah, and actually to eat and celebrate, the birth of Yitzhak coming on, a direct fulfillment of prophecy to Abraham, eating this food. Abraham met with them again later on, overseeing Sodom and Gomorrah, and God talking to them in dialogue. Non-corporeal beings could not interact directly with human beings in the same way, okay? Remember the prophet Daniel and the angel Gabriel? These were night visions, okay? These were night visions when the angel was speaking to them. Non-corporeal beings cannot directly interact with human beings unless they're in some sort of earthbound vessel or cloak or something, what you say. It doesn't make them totally human. It doesn't mean they have a heart beating in their chest and all this. It just allows them to have a temporary vessel in order to serve out the will of God. Now, to bring this to conclusion, many Midrashic rabbis, Kabbalists, and other people, I just read to you what one interpretation was, and modern orthodoxy. When I read in Hebrew and read it in the English translation, this is what modern orthodoxy believes. Other stricter forms of orthodoxy said, I will slap you in the mouth if you say these were sons of God instead of sons of idols and things of this nature, okay? There's no such thing as fallen angels. But there again, there is a possibility. This is my opinion, and some of the sages and rabbis agree with me in this opinion, is that sometimes an angel, and whether they're a part of the adversary legion or command or whatever, and seeking virtue among mankind or not, they may be given local autonomy. In other words, if you have a very long task and it takes years and years and years, like the angel Gabriel, whatever, dealing with the prince of Persia, going back and forth to Daniel, giving prophecy and things of that nature, and giving interpretation and all of this, or the angel Death in Egypt, that killed all the firstborn of Egypt, that finally liberated the Jews from slavery. They could be given local autonomy to do certain tasks. In other words, they may be allowed to think more or less for themselves. It does not mean they have a soul, does not mean they have the same enjoyment of will that mankind has. We are corporeal beings, they are non-corporeal beings, but when they interact with physicality in our three-dimensional space and time, they have to assume some sort of corporeal form, at least temporarily. And the implication is that some of these angels may have overstayed their assignment, their duties and things of that nature, and they and in other words, working with the adversary to prosecute virtue where there's no virtue to found. There's even a story where two angels, I can't remember their name, I think it's in Kabbalah, they said, we want to go down and really and report to you if the crime and severity warrants wiping out all of mankind, and God allowed them to do that. But the thing is, the story is, they got involved in human affairs too much, they became seduced. The question is, can a Malach, an angel, a messenger of God, if he inhabits a corporeal vessel temporarily, can they be seduced by some of the same sins of mankind as we can, that we are 100% corporeal all the time, even though we have a spiritual dimension with us? Our nefesh is quantum tangled between spirituality and physicality, but we are anchored more in physicality because we were created from the earth. Angels were created in heaven. So you see this dichotomy of truths, okay? Christians go way out there with Nephilim. They said these were demons. These became satanic influences upon mankind. This is the great rebellion of angels. I don't go there. But it is possible, if these angels did overstay their welcome on earth, they took their assignment too seriously, or maybe not serious enough, and they interacted with women and things, and did what men do with women, especially beautiful women and everything else. If they did have giants, that would be a major corruption in the human genome. And if the human genome was unrecoverable, then that would be a logical explanation for God to judge the world and start over and hit the reset button, okay? So this is my opinion as a scientist. As far as fairness of judging the entire world because of the influences of a number of adversarial angels, angels that stayed in their earthly vessel too long and allowed themselves to be seduced. Of course, God would have judged those angels, but these angels, whatever, if they did involve themselves in human affairs, like what I'm implying here, it's not. They didn't overwhelm man's will. They seduced them as a test of their virtue, but maybe they stayed too long. Think about Yaakov's ladder, angels going up and down. I think this is interesting. Just think about it, but don't go out on a tangent and then draw broad-based conclusions. We know there are giants talked about throughout the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. Okay, Joshua dealt with giants in Jericho, right? There were giants in Canaan when the 12 spies went there, and they were afraid of them. Okay, there were a race of giants or titans on earth during this time before the flood. So are they the same giants as an NBA basketball player? Or someone you see in the Olympics, or someone a big muscle builder? I don't know, but I think these people were greater than any giant you could see on this planet, greater than any athlete, professional athlete that you enjoy in your NFL games. I think they were completely different. But there's not a lot of detail here. That means God does not want to get involved in providing any more information than he did. But the fact that it was in the Torah at all means this lessons of truth should be discussed today in the 21st century. For Jews to get out the word about what God has to say about chapter 6 in the book of Genesis about the Nephilim, what God intended to say, what God did not intend to say. Again, don't take any sentences or words out of context. See how that word, fallen ones, Nephilim, are used throughout the Tanakh to have a final, logical, sound, and righteous conclusion. This is ben-Emmett signing out of the Torah Watchman Show. Please share the wealth of knowledge and love to everyone you know. I'm always here to speak the Emmett truth to you, to do the deep diving and information, find interesting topics of interest. If you have any questions, please send them my way to keith.r.woodard@gmail.com. I will see you real soon. Shalom Aleichem.